Hi, this is Jan Kabili, your host for TheFIX, the podcast that's all about Photoshop, Lightroom, and post-processing. Tonight, we're going to take a little detour from our emphasis on post-processing to talk about something a little deeper, the importance of photography to my special guest, Roddy MacInnes, who is a professor of photography at University of Denver. Roddy is a fine art photographer. He's also a teacher, and he's one of the greatest guys that I know. He's also a natural-born storyteller. Let's talk with Roddy about why he thinks photography is important and take a look at some of his photographs, including a new project that he has using pinhole photography. Let's talk with Roddy MacInnes. Hi, Roddy. Thanks for coming today.
Thanks for inviting me back again, Jan. Thanks. Good to see you.
It's always fun to talk to you. So I have a question for you, Roddy. Of all the photographers that I know, you're the most invested in photography. You are always shooting photos. You always have your camera on you. And when you're not shooting, you're teaching about photography or attending a gallery show or looking through your huge collection of photo books or creating your own photo book. Why photography? Why is it so important for you?
I mean, I think it's an addiction, Jan. I think I've been doing it so long now that I can't imagine my life without photography. You know, it's always there. The camera's always there. Photographs are everywhere, and it's just an addiction, just like this.
Oh, Roddy.
No, sorry, Dan.
No, but why photography? Why not golf or something else?
Well, I mean, photography is, it's that accessible medium that's, all you have to do is press the button and you get it. You create an image. You create a frozen moment of, or a frozen memory. And there's something very magical about that, which is difficult to explain.
Well, try. What's the magic part?
Well, it's that, a photograph is the closest thing to representing reality that I know of. And it's frozen. It's like what do they say? The mirror with a memory. It's like a little mirror, but it freezes your memories, and then that makes your memories very poignant, and as soon as you take a photograph, especially of someone you love or of your life, then the nostalgia is immediately starting to accumulate, and if I take a photograph now and I look at it in 10 years, it's loaded with 10 years of nostalgia and memory, and that's very rich, I think.
So you're a professor of photography and you spend a lot of time talking to students about taking photos and why to take photos. What do you talk to them about?
Well, I tell them that, it's about life. Photography is just one of these, or a camera is one of these things you can put between yourself and life or the universe, to try and understand what your relationship with life is and to celebrate life. And most of my students are not photography majors per se. They're just it's an elective course for most of my students. They're business majors or English majors or math majors, and so I'm not trying to make them artists, just trying to enrich their lives through photography.
But a lot of those people fall in love with photography. I've seen it because I've had that great opportunity to go along with you on some of your photo workshops and meet some of your students. And they are not just taking this as another class that they don't care about. They are totally into it once they see or once they meet you and start, getting involved. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think most people, everybody takes photographs, but most people don't take it seriously, or they're not conscious of why they're taking photographs. And I think if you engage in a conversation and make people more aware of how they can enrich their lives through photography, then they start taking it more seriously. And I think if you just encourage them, their photographs are every bit as meaningful as anybody else's photographs, then they start to take it more seriously and become more conscious of the process.
So can you think of an example? Like, tell us a story about a student that you think photography really was important for.
I was thinking recently, one of my students who seemed to be just passing through, and I remember engaging in a conversation with her, and her parents had advised her to do a business degree, I think it was, and not to do photography because you can't make a living from working as a photographer. And then just before she graduated, she realized that she did want to, photography was a passion, and that she wanted to pursue photography. So she asked me for some advice, and I told her to apply for the one of the internships at Anderson Ranch, which you did too, Jan. And she did that, and she worked there for a year, and she I think it changed her life, and she realized that she could be a photographer. And now she's gone off to the Peace Corps now, but she's going to off to the Peace Corps in Africa somewhere, and she's going to make a project and a book from her 2 years in the Peace Corps. So I think, anyway, that was a kind of a transformation for me. And also I think of another student whose parents told her the same thing, and she was desperate to be a photographer. And as soon as she graduated and got free from her parents, she went to Oxford University for 6 months and did a residency there on women in photography. And then she did a PhD in London in photography. And that was a lovely transformation.
So what about you? You weren't always a photographer. How did photography become important in your life?
My uncle gave me a camera when I was 12, and I, immediately, like everybody else, started to celebrate my life in photographs. Discovered the magic of using a camera, and then putting the film into the drugstore and getting the photographs back, and 2 weeks later, and that was my life 2 weeks ago, and it was very exciting to look at that. And but I never really took photography. I wasn't really aware of the power of photography. I wasn't conscious of how I would use it. I would take a photograph because something exciting was happening, but never really thought about why. And I think maybe going to school to study photography. I went back to Scotland to do an undergraduate degree in photography, and that's when I started to be conscious of the process. Started more awareness in my photographs, I would say.
And when I met you, we were in grad school in photography. That was pretty amazing, wasn't it?
Oh, it was totally amazing, Jan. Totally. Of course, I was in the throes of a depression.
Oh, you were. Well, but photography helped to bring you out, I think.
Yeah, and that's when I realized that it's a therapeutic sort of medium, and for me personally, I've always used photography for for therapy, I guess, and even more so since I met you, Jan. Nothing to do with you, Jan, of course.
Well, what do you mean? What do you mean by therapy? Like for people out there who they don't even know what you're talking about. Give an example.
Well, I guess it's art therapy. I suppose you could put it under that sort of in that category. I guess it's a. I used it. I was in the throes of depression when I arrived at graduate school. I'd been a pretty heavy alcoholic, and I stopped drinking for 6 years, but I hadn't slept, so that kind of put me into a bad mental state. But I used photography to find my way back out of it again, and one of the project that I did that I would say was most significant to me was I started taking portraits of everybody who I interacted with on a kind of a regular basis, including you, Jan. And I would photograph everybody, and I was thinking about the looking glass theory in psychology. I guess it's this theory about how we come to know who we are, and we come to know who we are from the reactions of other people towards us. So, so I would try to use photography to capture that reaction, I guess. And then I had this feeling that, if I need someone else to help me understand who I am, when I look at another person, I'm actually looking at myself. So, sort of deepen my relationship with photography and help me come out of a depression.
Wow, sounds like great medicine. And obviously, you've got a knack for it too, Roddy. So you guys may not know that Roddy is always taking his camera with him and constantly photographing people. And because he's doing it, I think, in the moment without a lot of setup, he really manages to let the audience see the people. When I look at your photos, even if I don't know the people in them, I feel like I do. They're not posing. You really get to see them. It's hard to explain.
Well, I think somehow, I obviously think about this a lot. And I think when you photograph another person or you engage in the process of taking a portrait of another person, it kind of intensifies the moment. It makes the moment more poignant somehow, I guess. Just the act of photographing it. There's kind of this idea of being in the moment. When you're with another person, and a photograph I think is a way to celebrate that.
That's fantastic. Another thing that I know you do a lot is that you look at photographs that other people take, don't you?
Yes.
And what about that? Why is that important? Do you recommend other people do it?
Yeah, I do. But the photographs that are most important to me are photographs taken by people that I know. You're often asked, who's your favorite photographer? Well, it's always someone I know. Because knowing the person makes it much more interesting. Makes the photographs have more meaning.
That's true. And one of the things I love about this new online world and the ability to talk to one another is that you can get to know some people who, are kind of in that famous category.
Yeah.
That maybe before we just got to look at their photos in books. Well, now you can actually talk to them as we're doing now. And it's fantastic. And I think you're right. It really does deepen your understanding of what the person is trying to do. And you can appreciate what's in their images more. I love that.
Absolutely. And you learn more about them. I think, obviously photographs reveal a lot about who the person is, or the photographer is. Well, hopefully.
Well, another thing, now let's get down to a more kind of nuts and bolts level. One of the things I've noticed that you do is in your own work outside of teaching, you're constantly working on photo projects. And so one question I have is, why work on a photo project? Why not just sort of go along and take photos willy-nilly? What's the importance of a project?
Well, I suppose it's more focused, I would say, I think, because I photographed people, for 30, 40 years, I photographed the same people. And when I look at those photographs, it becomes like an extended portrait of that person. And that to me is kind of like a project that makes it gives it a bit more strength, I guess. So, but I do think of everything that I do as a project. I think of every photograph I take is part of the big project, which is my life. But there are little chapters within that where I try to take photography a bit more seriously, because I try to focus in on a particular subject or a different way to use the camera. And, just experimenting, just playing, I guess, including the iPhone. The iPhone's a great way to play with photography. That's what I love about cell phone photography. It's the idea that you're playing, but it's also a serious project. My Instagram project is my black and white project, my black and white square project. I'm not sure how serious that is, but I'm also doing a project on a lady in North Dakota that's I found her photograph. I'm going to show you some of those images later, but I found her photographs that she took in 1917. And I've been using her photographs as the source material for a project. But the project but it also enriches, I'm also looking for parallels between, what she did and what I'm doing, so I'm kind of, using her the project that I'm doing on her is a way to, understand myself as well. But I'm also doing a project using a pinhole camera, and just it's more of an attempt to slow myself down, because I tend to be. You can probably tell by the way I'm talking. I'm kind of I'm kind of an ADD sort of nervous person, so I'm always doing things very fast. I always take photographs very fast, and so I'm doing a pinhole project to try and slow myself down.
Oh, well, I'm the same way, Roddy, and I really appreciate that fast approach to life. So you don't have to apologize to me.
Yeah.
So now, one thing about doing projects, I think among your projects, I know you're working on a very serious photo book. And I know there are other people out there who would love to do a serious project, but they feel that maybe they need some compensation for that because it takes a lot of time and effort. And you figured out a way to subsidize some of your projects with grants. Yeah. Could you give people pointers on grants? Where do you get grants and how do you write them up and how do you get them?
Well, I teach at the University of Denver, and they have pretty generous grants there. So that's the only place I typically apply for grants. But the first 3 or 4 years that I was writing grants, I didn't get anything. And then I kind of learned the secret, and the secret is to make the people who are reading your grant or who are going to award you the grant, make them make them want to do your project. Make your project sound exciting enough that they would want to do it. I think that's also read a lot of other people's grants, because I'm on committees that award people grants. And I'm always drawn to the projects that I get very excited about and I'd want to do myself. I think for me, that's the secret. And keep the writing very concise, very clear, and write so that people who are not working in your field will understand what you're talking about, what you're trying to do.
That's a great idea. And, every time I hear you get a grant, I'm so jealous. You've had grants to write books. You've had grants to lead workshops in other countries. And it's all out there. It's just you have to kind of know where to go and how to appeal to people. And I think, Roddy, you really understand how to connect with people, and that is a way to get them to give you the resources you need to do what you want to do. Right.
So, but I'm not very good. I wasn't very good. I had to learn how to write like I talk.
Yeah.
Which took a lot of skill. Yeah.
But that's really interesting. Write like you talk. Don't write like a fancy schmancy, right? Because everybody will understand.
Exactly. People see through it right away. They'd rather talk to a human. Cool. I was thinking about the projects. Every project, you kind of learn something. You learn something new about photography, and you learn something new about yourself. I think that's the most important thing, isn't it? And I think the kind of projects that I'm most drawn to are the photo projects that put me into situations that I wouldn't normally be in. And I'm there because I'm doing a photography project. I've got a camera. And that's a beautiful way to engage with the world. So it's this lovely tool that takes you places you wouldn't normally go. And I think and every time you do that, you learn a lot. And that's what it's all about, isn't it?
It is. And that's the perfect segue into you sharing your screen and showing us a couple of your photo projects.
Okay.
You guys are going to love this.
Yeah. So, the first project I'm going to share is this pinhole photography project. Actually, I started this project in 2003, I think it was, in Lincoln City in Oregon. I had a girlfriend at the time that was teaching at Willamette University in Salem, Oregon. So I would head over to the coast and take photographs on the coast. And then I returned for a week. And in an attempt to slow myself down, I spent a week, this is the hotel I was staying in. I spent a week using a pinhole camera, taking photographs of waves. So I stood in the ocean probably for about 8 hours a day for about 6 days, and just taking pinhole photographs of waves, long exposures, from 30 seconds to 4 minutes. And this is
now here's the thing. There are people out there who don't know what a pinhole camera is.
Okay. Pinhole camera is it's a very primitive, a very basic sort of a camera. It's just a little box, a dark box that has a hole that lets an image come through. It doesn't have a lens. It's based on the camera obscura, which was a darkened room, which would have there'd be a little aperture on one side of the room and a white wall at the back of the room. When the aperture was opened, an image was formed on the back wall, of what was outside the darkened room, and it be upside down and reversed. So a pinhole camera is basically a camera obscura, but a miniaturized version. And with this, I was using film, medium format, black and white film in this little pinhole camera, and so very basic. There's no viewfinder, there's no lens, there are no functions. It's just the film and a little hole to let the light in to expose the film. And that's basically it. So because it's a tiny, tiny aperture, I think this aperture was f/260. And so a really tiny aperture, which means the shutter has to be open for a lengthy time to get an exposure. So you get this, this is a 30-second exposure. So you get the motion of the water rushing back out after the wave has hit the shore. This is another example. So, just playing, and I think I shot about 300 rolls of film, because you don't know what you're getting, until you develop the film. And I would include people sometimes. There's some people on the beach. and the wave rushing out. I mean, it's not possible to do this with in bright sunlight. It's not possible to do this with a regular camera unless you use neutral density filters. But even with neutral density filters, which I'll explain in a minute, without neutral density filters, you can't slow the shutter down long enough to get this kind of motion. There's some people, and this was the effect that I ultimately zeroed in on. It's so I was using 120 film, roll film in this little wood and brass pinhole camera, and what I was doing in this photo, typically a photograph is a slice of time. It's a 250th or a 125th of a second, so that the entire image is all exactly the same amount of time. But in this case, the difference between the left-hand side and the right-hand side of this photograph is about 30 seconds, about half a minute, because I was actually winding the film through the camera as I was exposing it. I had a little brass knob I had a little pair of vice grips attached to the brass knob that advanced the film. So I would advance the film, stop, advance, stop, advance, stop. And I did that for 30 seconds to get this effect. And that's the effect that I ultimately, this was the desired effect that I wanted. And so I capitalized on this and spent a lot more time doing this kind of stuff.
So how did you know 30 seconds to stop? Did you do tests?
Well, actually what, Jana, I didn't know. I didn't know until I developed the first batch of film. And so I developed the first batch of film, about 100 rolls. And then I'd taken notes, so I kind of had a good idea of what was going on. And it also depended on the weather. If it was overcast, the exposure was longer. If it was bright sunlight, the exposure was shorter. So I had to take notes, so that I would know, what the effect was. So I developed the first 100 rolls of film, and then I went back out again and shot some more, sort of capitalizing on, the effect that I wanted, which is kind of like this. And but I did some digital stuff as well. I tried to do something similar with digital, but I haven't yet found a way to do get the same effect. These are some digital photographs, but I had to use neutral density filters on these. I started taking photographs with my digital camera in bright sunlight of the waves. So even with the ISO at the least sensitive, 100 ISO, and the aperture closed down to f32 to get the slowest shutter speed. The slowest shutter speed in bright sunlight was still 125th of a second. So I had to drive up to Portland and buy some neutral density filters because I didn't have any with me. And a neutral density filter basically blocks the light, and it blocks it. You can block one stop, two stop. So you can block the light by half the amount, quarter of the amount and an eighth of the amount. One stop, two stops, and three stops. And what it does, it blocks the amount of light so that you can get a slower shutter speed. So I was using 125th of a second. If I blocked it one stop, with a one-stop neutral density filter, I would be at a 60th of a second. If I used a two-stop neutral density filter, I would then be able to get a 30th of a second. And then I was using a three-stop neutral density filter, which means I'm shooting these at a 15th of a second. So the only way to do this is with a neutral density filter.
And then do you put it on a tripod or your hand holder?
I had it on a tripod. I had it in an old tripod because I was in the salt water, so I had the tripod in the water. So I sacrificed a tripod. And I started playing with, just experimenting. I was out there for a week, and it was kind of a vacation, and I was slowing down. I felt myself slowing down, and it was just nice to play. And then, make diptychs and triptychs of these images to see, how they work together. So it was kind of fun.
Are these digital prints? Are these?
These were digital prints. Yes. So these are digital files. But this is the effect that I want. So I'm going to actually, I shot 400 rolls of film over 10 years ago, and I've never really done anything with them. So somebody wants to buy one. So I thought, maybe there's something in these images. So I'm going to go back out again this summer. I'm going to spend another week on the Oregon coast, and I'm going to take a lot more of these. And this is a print that I made myself, and I'm not I'm not as skilled as you are, Jan, with using Photoshop. So I've given my negatives, my 120 negatives, my medium format negatives to Jonathan Singer of Singer Editions in Boston, and he's scanning them, and he's going to make prints for me, and I'm sure he's going to get a lot more information out of the negatives than I could. I don't have the patience.
He's an amazing guy too. Isn't he like the printer to the stars or to rock stars or something?
He was, I guess. He printed with Graham Nash, I guess. Graham Nash is one of the first to have a print editions studio.
As in Crosby Nash? Still
exactly. Yeah. And I think one of Graham Nash's prints was the first digital print to sell at auction at Sotheby's, I think. But anyway, Jonathan Singer, who's got my negatives now, there was a Singer and Nash editions for a while, I guess, but Jonathan's on his own now, so hopefully he'll do something interesting with them. So that's my Pinhole project, Jan. Should I move on to the next one?
It is, but I just want to say you're not just sort of doing these projects to put in the closet. Your work is being it's being shown nationally, and it's in galleries, and it's in books, and this is serious stuff. So I'm really proud of you, Roddy. This is fantastic work.
Jan, thank you very much. I'll have another glass of wine. Thank you very much.
Do that.
Should I move on to the next project?
Please do. Let's see what else.
Oh, so my next project is Jim River. This is the project about these photographs on the right. This album of photographs I bought at this antiques mall in Denver, Colorado, 25 years ago now. And I bought it from these two ladies on the left. They had the stall in this antiques mall where I bought the albums. And I was kind of captivated by the images in the little album. And this is the lady who took the photographs. And there was information in the album, her name, which was Nina Wystan, and the year she took the photographs, 1917, and one geographical reference to Jim River. Anyway, I looked at her photographs. That's her. She's holding her Kodak camera, some sort of brownie camera from 1917. And I was kind of captivated by her images. They're very fresh. They're having a lot of fun. This lady, she was only 16. She looks like she's older. I guess it's the way they dressed or the hairdos or something. But she was 16. She had left home, and she'd taken the 25-mile journey to the next town where there was a teacher's training school. So she was there, and she was 16 years old. So she's celebrating her life with photography, doing the same as you and I do, Jan. She left home, she brought her camera, and she's celebrating her life and photographing her friends and just the fun things she gets up to. And I thought they were very contemporary.
They are. You normally don't see pictures from this era where people are moving and being so informal. Yeah. Often they're posed, right?
Exactly. And I think it was, before this, film emulsion was a lot less sensitive. So exposure times were a lot longer. So this is around about the time when, emulsions are a bit faster, lenses are a lot more accurate, and they're starting to use faster shutter speeds. So, before this, you didn't see very many people smiling in photographs because the exposure time was so long. So this is around about the time when people are starting to, Kodak, you press the button, we do the rest. They kind of democratized photography and, brought it into the modern era. And this is when you start seeing a lot of people smiling, just doing what they would normally do.
When is this again?
1917.
Wow.
So, so roll film, George Eastman invents roll film, I think, 1888. So she's probably the first or second generation of, kind of regular folks to be keeping a photo album, documenting her life in photographs. So anyway, I just thought they were very contemporary. And, I can imagine these being on Facebook now. If Facebook had been around then, she would have been posting these photographs there. They're very contemporary. And this is her. She would label the photographs, the whole family. That's her. The second from the left. I'm not sure that lady sitting down with a little child is. I wonder if they were servants or something. They look Native American. I'm not quite sure. And this is the photograph. There was actually two albums, and this photograph was cut in two. The left-hand side was in one album, and the other side was in another album. I'm just wondering, that's the woman there whose photograph album this is. That's her, Nina, on the left. Maybe she fell out with the girl on the right. Maybe she ate too many carrots or something. I'm not sure. But anyway, but she labeled this photograph Jim River, and that's how I was able to find out. I looked at these photographs for 10 years. I kind of fell in love with the people and the place. And so, 10 years later, I did a Google search with Jim River and Nina Wystan in 1917, and it brought me to a place in North Dakota. And Nina would arrange her photographs like this in triptychs, with a bit of text underneath. I'm sure they're talking about guys, or thinking about guys. And that's Nina on the right. So she worked in these triptychs. So when I made my journey to North Dakota 10 years later, I started working in triptychs as well. It took me a while to get used to the landscape, because the landscape is pretty, at first glance, it's quite featureless. It's quite flat. So, the way to, and I'm not a great landscape photographer. So if I put these three photographs together, it kind of strengthened the image overall. And then this is the area where her family homesteaded in South Dakota, just across the border from North Dakota. They homesteaded. They came from Finland in the 1880s, and this is the area. So I was just, creating a little landscape tribute to this person and the place. That's a.
Yep. So I have to say, I love this photo. And for those who are just listening and not looking, this is a triptych of a farmhouse in the middle with a wheat field, I guess. Yeah. And on the left, a close-up of corn in a cornfield. And on the right, a close-up of eggs in a nest.
Right.
And it's just such a beautiful selection. What made you choose these photographs? I'm sure you took many others.
Yeah, I took a lot, Jan, and they just seem to work together. The eggs. It was a pheasant's nest. It was just right. That's actually the photograph in the middle. It's a little church, the Finnish Apostolic Lutheran Church, I guess, which was built when these people homesteaded this area in the 1880s. So the corn was in the next field, and the eggs were, just in front of this church. So it kind of, extended the landscape photograph a little bit, because, again, I'm not a great landscape photographer.
Oh, Roddy. You are. But, the idea that the landscape is more than just the far shot, that it also involves intimate details, is interesting.
Exactly. And, and I think when you do juxtapose photographs, they start talking to each other. They communicate with each other. So, it takes a bit of practice to put them together, but some work and some don't. But, stuff like this is kind of a slow shutter speed with the grass waving back and forward. And then, and one thing that, like I was saying before about projects, you learn a lot about yourself. And I was kind of using this woman's photographs, and thinking about how we use photographs in general, because she, she was doing what we all do with photography, celebrating her life. But then, she died in 1983, and her daughter died in 1993, and that's the year that I found her photographs. So it's kind of sad, that was the end of her family line, and her photographs were basically abandoned. So I had this idea that I would, use my photo album, my family album, as kind of a lifeboat. So what I did was I brought her into my family album. So the photograph in the middle is my photograph, and the other two photographs are hers. So it's kind of a way of, connecting me with her and her photographs with mine. So now we share the same photo album. And it seems kind of silly, but it's very comforting to me to think that she's no longer dead. She's still alive. She's in my photo album. So, it's kind of exciting.
And the way that you got these photos that you took is that you spent a lot of time in her environment, right? Yeah,
I probably spent a year up there now. I did a 3-month residency at one point. And so I've gotten really connected with the community up there. I've been up there for 15 years now. And
up there is what? In the middle of
up there, sorry. Yeah, it's Dickey County, North Dakota. And it's a town called Ellendale in Dickey County, North Dakota, which is kind of the southeast part of North Dakota, just north of Aberdeen, South Dakota. But another thing that I was trying, just playing with this idea of photography, and when you juxtapose, basically all of all of our family albums are basically the same. If someone came from another planet, and they looked at they wouldn't see individual photo albums. They would see the photo album of the species or the group sort of thing. So that's Nina in the middle, on the right hand side in the middle photograph, and then that's her when she was 16 years old in 1917, and the photograph to the left is my grandfather in 1917, and then the photograph on the right is me when I'm the middle guy, the middle silly looking guy in the British Navy when I was 16. So, looking for these common connections and photographs, that, to celebrate inner connection, I guess. And then, I also did a lot of portraits in the community. I would ask people to bring, high school graduation photographs, and, the people who were in the photographs, then I would take a portrait of them now and then ask them to, talk about what photography meant to them. But most people didn't really know what to say. It was kind of like me before I went to undergraduate. If someone was to ask me why I take photographs, I would have known what to say, because we just take photographs and don't think about why we take them until we get an education, I guess. So I didn't have a lot of luck asking people to talk about photographs. But then I did something like this. This is I would have people bring, a photograph of them when they were a child, and I would, scan the photograph, enlarge the photograph and print it out, and then have the person, re-photograph the person in the location where the original photograph was taken, just as a way to, further the conversation about how we use photographs.
And this is still a real classroom?
Yeah, it's a little museum now. It's a one-room schoolhouse, and this woman Jeanette, she was a student there, and then she ended up teaching in the same one-room schoolhouse, and then they were going to demolish it, so she bought the place and turned it into a museum.
How cool!
Really nice. And this is John. He's 96 this year. That's him he was a bomber pilot in the U.S. Air Force, stationed in Ascension Island in the middle of the Atlantic, and then in North Africa and Europe. He's a great guy. He's one of my closest friends up there.
So this is interesting. You don't just go and take these people's photographs and go away. You've actually become part of their lives.
Well, yeah, it's one of the reasons for starting this project was I was feeling a bit low or a bit down about the possibility of living alone for the rest of my life. So I come up with this idea of redefining what family means to me. So hence my Facebook albums are called family albums. So if I take a photograph of someone, I can consider them to be part of my family. So this is kind of I have a really kind of a strong connection to this community. So I have this really, really nice family up there. And it's funny, this guy here, John, his wife died about 20 years ago. So he does, with a few other people in the community, he does seances, and he tries to communicate with his wife. And during one of these seances, which I was invited to, he said that I was he found out that I was his son in a previous life. I never told him that I was looking for family, but that was really nice to be his son.
Oh,
so he calls me son now, which is really beautiful. It makes me feel really connected. And it's so now I'm through this woman up here. These are all my friends in this community in North Dakota, and it's just lovely to use photography. I would have never connected with these people, had it, if it wasn't for photography. Not just my photography, but the photographs taken by this woman in 1917.
These are fantastic. And I want to say something you've taught me, Roddy, which is a lot of your portraits, like the ones you're showing now that you've taken, are natural light photographs. You're not using studio lights. You're not setting anything up. And what you taught me is that photography is really about light.
Yes.
And that's what to look for. If you want a great photo, look for the shadows on the wall. Look for the way that the light delineates the important features of someone's face.
Right.
Don't just take, a flat-on portrait in a giant high contrast noonday sun. It's not going to work out, right?
Right. Exactly, Jan. And I think it's this, it's having a love affair with light. It's, been really, and it takes practice, doesn't it? It's the music, it's the poetry, it's the love in photography, I guess, isn't it? The light. And I like to think it's about light and it's about enlightenment. Or enlightenment through light and photography and love. I guess those are the basic ingredients of what I consider to be a successful photograph. This is Jeanette. This light's not predictable.
What is that?
Well, see, now I just contradicted myself because this light is actually it's overcast. It's kind of flat, but maybe she's holding a mannequin, so it's kind of a funny mannequin. So maybe that overcomes the lack of high quality light. Jeanette runs the local museum, so she was transferring this dummy over to the photo gallery. That we're having some sort of event. Not the photo gallery, sorry. There's a place called the Opera House in Ellendale, North. This is downtown Ellendale, North Dakota. Population 1,400, and they have an old opera house that was built in 1915, I think. No, 1915. So they're in the process of renovating it. So they have all kinds of functions there, and concerts and plays and gallery exhibitions, and it's kind of an exciting place. And I think that may be my last photograph, Jan. Oh no, there's one more. That's Charlie. You've met Charlie, haven't you?
I have. I love Shirley.
She came down to visit me in Boulder.
Shirley is an incredibly intelligent, articulate woman.
Ah, she's great. Yeah, she's one of my best friends up there in Ellendale. Actually, she lives in the adjacent town, Oaks, North Dakota. So I think that's my last photograph, Jan.
Well, thank you so much, Roddy. I love seeing your photos. So you guys, what we used to do when we were in grad school, which wasn't that long ago because we both went to grad school as adults after other careers. We both
what did you call me?
You're grown up. Not really. You're never a grown up, Roddy.
No, totally.
But Roddy used to do slideshows, and we would all go over to the basement where he lived, which actually was in the basement of my house for a while. Yeah. And he would sit there and we'd go for an hour or 2 hours looking at slideshows of all the photos that he'd taken because he always was shooting. And so, there were photos of us and our friends and what we were doing. And it was so fun. It was way better than TV.
Yeah, Jan, I love those slideshows. I miss those slideshows. We don't do it anymore, do we? And one thing I learned from those slideshows was to have, the audience in the slideshow. Then it was about us, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Then it was sharing. We're all connected.
Yeah. Well, now we get to do it on a broader basis. And I'm so happy to share with all of you out there, my friend Roddy MacInnes. He's a fantastic photographer, a great guy, and he's well known in the world of art photography. So we're lucky to have him spend a little time with us here. Thank you very much, Roddy.
Jan, thank you very much. I love you. Thank you, Jan.
I always love talking to Professor Roddy MacInnes, and I'm so glad that you got a chance to hear some of what he has to say too, and to see some of his really interesting projects. If you like this episode of The Fix, please head on over to iTunes and give us some stars and leave some nice comments for us. And don't forget to tune in next week for another terrific episode of TWiP, The Fix.